The female lead tells women's stories. Remarkable, diverse, inspiring. An educational charity promoting positive female role models who show the many different routes to success and fulfillment.
So often I hear people saying, oh, how do I get started? How do I do this? How do you do it? You just start. You have to begin. And it won't be perfect and it'll be messy and it'll be hard, but you're doing something and you're on your way.
Empowering future generations of women through films and a book of 60 women donated to 18,000 schools in the UK and USA, reaching millions of young people. And through our female lead societies, we help girls to discover new role models that speak to their passions, ambitions and careers. Through our research into social media and mental health, we found a solution to the negative impact of social media on teen girls. Through a simple intervention which encouraged girls to follow different influencers, we were able to change their entire social media experience and sense of well-being. We called this campaign Disrupt Your Feed, and it reached 20 million people on social, with 330 million impressions all over the globe. So what's next? As well as inspiring girls, we're now finding ways to measurably improve the lives of older women through data, research, and the stories of those who have overcome challenges and found their own personal versions of success. We're a long way from being finished. Join us in our mission.
Are we going to talk about women's rights again? Yes, we're going to talk about it until there's balance.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's LinkedIn Live. We're going to be talking about how to address unconscious bias at work. Not only are we going to talk about it, but we're going to talk about how to recognize it and how to put a stop to it. So really important subject. Let me first introduce myself. I'm Edwina Dunn. I'm the founder of the Female Lead. I am going to not only have the pleasure of meeting our guest, Stacy Gordon, but also asking her the first few questions. And then it's your turn. So do please, as you're listening, think of questions, send them in to us, and then we'll go through them towards the end. So let me first tell you a little bit about our guest. Stacy Gordon is a diversity and recruitment expert. She's an MBA. She's also a LinkedIn instructor. And she is an author, and she's about to publish her second book, which is coming out in March. And that's called UNBIAS, Addressing Unconscious Bias at Work. It's coming out on the 30th of March. So I think we'll have a few words about that. So Stacey's going to help us talk about diversity, equity, inclusion concepts, how to identify them in the workplace, understand where bias lies, and provide readers with tools to, readers and our audience with tools to remove those barriers. So, and let's just say a little bit about her business. It's called Rework, and that's the business, Stacey, that you founded. And it's all about rewiring how companies work, how to recruit and engage women and professionals of colour. And, I think it was born out of your frustration for companies not hitting targets, but maybe let's talk about that. So, Welcome, Stacey. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to participate and be able to chat with you and to hear from the audience. And so, yeah, I'm excited to get questions today, because that's the really great thing, is being able to answer those burning questions that you have. So I'm looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Well, I'm very selfish and I always get to ask the first questions, so anyway, that's my joy. Maybe first you could just introduce to us, why you decided to tackle the subject of unconscious bias. It's a tough subject. What got you to that focus?
It's what got me there is, and it's also part of why the company is called Rework. And I always tell this story, but it's just, I started off working as a recruiter. I've always loved helping people to get jobs, to get into jobs they love. I love the thought that, if you find a job that you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And I really, truly believe that, because I love the work that I do and I don't feel that it's like work. And so I want to make sure everyone has that. And so working as a recruiter, I would spend a lot of time helping individuals get jobs. And what I started to find was that though I loved working with the candidates, I was really hating my clients, because the clients were the companies, right? And it was pre-Zoom, so everything that we did was by phone, right? And I realized that sometimes, being born, so some people know that I was actually born in London, and so I speak very properly. And I realized many times I'd be on the phone with companies and I thought, wow, they don't know that I'm Black. Because if they knew that I was Black, they wouldn't say half the things that they said to me.
Wow.
And it really hit me, and you go through through that denial, right? I'm being too sensitive. It's just a one-time thing. It's not going to happen again. But when it happens repeatedly, over and over and over again, and when you're trying to help individuals get hired and you realize that you have to go through more hoops, you have to do more things, you've got to check more boxes to get a Black person hired or to get someone with an accent hired, you're like, okay, this is not coincidence, right? There's an actual problem here.
Yeah.
And so that is what made me really transition from recruiting to going into companies and helping them to remove those barriers to hiring, because I frankly was just disgusted with how things were working.
Well, do you know what a great place to start? You hate something, you're disgusted with it. I'm going to change it. So you were born in London, but I understand you're in Los Angeles at the moment. So you're a long way from home.
I know.
Is that where your business is based now?
Yes, we are based in Los Angeles, but we do a lot of global work. We have been doing work. We're talking with companies in Australia and Singapore and London and Israel. And so, Spain, it's been really, really great to be able to have these conversations globally and realize that, yes, diversity is different in different places, but the underlying behavior that causes unconscious bias doesn't change, right? Mm-hmm. It may manifest itself differently because of different cultures, but it's the same behavior.
So what's the number one myth you'd like to address when it comes to unconscious bias?
Well, it's funny that you ask that, because there are so many myths about unconscious bias, right? There are myths that unconscious bias is made up as a way to create victims who are like boo-hooing about their situations, right? There's the myth that unconscious bias is something that we really can't solve for because it's unconscious. So how do we solve something if we don't know we're doing it? There's even the myth that we shouldn't be trying to address unconscious bias in the workplace. But I would say, granted, some of these aren't even really myths. They're just pushback, right, from people who are frustrated and don't understand the concept. But I think the biggest myth is that we treat everyone equally. We all think we treat everyone equally, and we believe that we aren't, as long as we're not overtly discriminating, that we aren't perpetuating bias. And I think that's the biggest myth, because it's the most harmful, because it gives people an out, right? It allows us to just continue our day-to-day and go, well, I'm not discriminating, so I'm good. And it's like, no, that's not true. And so it allows the status quo to continue. It allows change to not happen. And it allows people who are trying to bring attention to this to be seen as though they're just, causing trouble where there is none. And that couldn't be further from the truth.
So if you don't know what you don't know, right? So let's call it ignorance. Let's call it, yes, a lack of awareness, perhaps a casualness or something a little more dangerous than that. But if you don't know that you're doing it, how do you break that, really toxic loop?
Yeah, and I love that you used the word loop, because there is a concept called the cycle of socialization. And that's really what we are fighting against, right? Is this idea that we are all on this cycle, this loop. It's like a hamster wheel. And the only way to break it is to get off of it, right? You literally have to take yourself out of the loop and start to see it from the outside in. And it's kind of, when I think of it like that, it kind of reminds me of the Matrix, right? You take the pill and all of a sudden you can see. And I feel like that's what happened to a lot of people last year. Is all of a sudden we collectively woke up and the fog got lifted and people were like, wait, this is what's been happening? And it's like, yeah, that's kind of what's been happening. And so with unconscious bias, it's like, we unconsciously breathe, right? We breathe in, we breathe out, we do it, but we know that we're doing it, right? So it's the same kind of thing. We know that these things exist and we can willingly ignore it, or we can actually try to start to interrupt it. So it's not that we don't know that we're doing it, it's that we are willfully being ignorant of it. And if we actually want to do something about it, we do have to interrupt the bias that comes. And I'll give you an example of how that shows up. So, and Sonia will forgive me for this because we use this as an example in our trainings that we do. We do a lot of education and learning, but this is such a perfect example of unconscious bias at work, right? So when we, back when we were allowed to go into company offices, we were in a client space and we were trying to get our laptop set up so that we could do a presentation, and it wasn't connecting. And somebody said, oh, someone from IT will come by and help you. So somebody comes from IT and it happens to be a woman. And so after she left, the consultant, Sonia, turned to me and she goes, oh my goodness, I have to tell you that I was completely shocked when this woman walked up to me and I realized she was from IT. Because what do we say? We always say the IT guy, right? We think about IT as just being a man. And so in that moment, she had that aha where she was like, wow, I was expecting a man and my expectation was changed because a woman walked up. That's acknowledging that we have a bias, right? Now, there's nothing bad about that. It just is. It's like, oh, wow. Same reason when we see a surgeon and they're a woman, we're like, oh, right? It's just, it changes the perception that we have been socialized to believe, right? We have been socialized to believe that nurses are women, that teachers are women, that police officers are men, right? These are the things that we're socialized to believe. So it takes us saying, wow, I had this thought, and recognizing it and then doing something about it. So in that instance, when you think about, IT, is there anything that needs to be done? No. But if you're the person that's hiring, right? If you're hiring to fill positions in the IT department and you have that thought as you're going through people's resumes, you have to consciously say to yourself, wow, I have a bias, right, towards men or against women or whatever it is, right? I have this thought of what an IT person looks like. And I now need to change that thought so that I can make sure when I'm reviewing resumes that I am looking for people who fit the skills and experience and not the image that's in my head.
So quite an interesting sort of thought there, which is you're suggesting, I think, that everybody has aspects of bias in their head. And so it's not a thing done to others. It's a thing that we all do with our kind of mental preconceptions. But you also said something else. I hope I understood that right. But the other thing you said is that, we kind of took a pill and woke up last year and saw the world differently. Can you expand on either or both aspects of that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, so first when we're talking about bias, it's a thing that we think, right? It's not a thing that we do, right? Where the bad of bias comes in is when we then act on it and do something. So yes, the discrimination that comes afterwards is based in the bias, right? But if we're just thinking it, we don't do anything about it. When we recognize and we go, oh yeah, that was an interesting thought. Let's not do that again, right?
If we think it, that's also bias, isn't it? If we think it and we don't break it or rebalance it, is that not also bad? It's only, you're saying it's only when we act on it that it's bad.
Right, it's when we act on it. And so the thing is, if we are acting on it, like right now, we are acting on it because we're not thinking about it, right? We're just acting from our gut, what we've always done. So if we walk in to and again, I'll use the interviews as an example, and we end up hiring a bunch of men for the IT department, we have acted on the bias, but we have not thought about it, right? Because it's already there. It's ingrained in us. That's how we've been socialized. So in order to not act on it, you actually have to think about it, and you have to interrupt the thought and go, okay, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to overcome this bias. And so I'm going to make sure that any action I take is deliberate in a positive way, right? Or at least not in a negative way. Mm-hmm. And we have to actually take that step. But that step is the step that most of us miss. We don't do that. We don't consciously say, I'm going to make sure that I'm not acting from bias. Instead, we assume that we're not acting from bias because we don't have bad intent. But that's not accurate.
So I want to ask you about your book, because in your book, I am assuming you're starting to help us understand the things we can do. Can I just remind people maybe to start thinking about questions and sending them in, because we will get to that section very soon. But can you tell us a little bit about your book and how you're really trying to help organizations change these behaviors, this acting on biased thinking?
Yes. So the book is actually based on our framework, which is really 4 A's, right? We start at awareness, we go to alignment, we go to action, and then advocacy. Where a lot of people end up is in status quo. So what we find, which is before you even get to awareness, right? And that's where we talk about George Floyd, people sort of waking up, was most people were in status quo. It was like, we're just going to go along. We're going to continue doing what we've always done. And George Floyd kind of shocked the consciousness and helped people realize they got to an awakening, to an awareness where it was like, oh, wow, there is something different, right? There is something that maybe we need to be doing. And so then people went straight to, we need to do something, right? And they went straight to action. Whereas what we actually need to do is stay in the awareness phase for a little bit and understand, well, what is it that we need to do? Who are we doing it for? Why are we doing it? What is it going to do for our company if we're doing it as a company? And answering some of those questions. But most of those questions were not even being discussed. We were just going straight to, let's create a DEI council. Let's hire a chief diversity officer. Let's create some employee resource groups. And, and then we'll do some unconscious bias training. Which, again, all good things, right? They all need to happen, but they shouldn't happen without a strategy, right? They've got to be tied together with some kind of a strategy to help, because otherwise, how are you going to know when you have hit the target that you're trying to hit or accomplish the goal that you're trying to accomplish if you don't actually have one to begin with? And so, I wrote this book, UNBIAS, when it seemed like the world was on fire, right? Because it wasn't just George Floyd. We had the election in the United States. Mm-hmm. We had just the pandemic, of course, that we were all going through, global pandemic. There was just so much going on. And I forget who it was that said, like, the world was like a dumpster fire. And it really was. But I was just struck by how much people needed direction. And I was also really struck by just how unaware people had been previously. It was like, wow, you really didn't know this. You really didn't see this. And it was, I don't even know the right word it was really hard to see that so many people did not understand what has been explained to them again and again and again, and that it took some really tragic events for them to finally go, oh, maybe, and to validate what was being said.
So obviously you expressed disgust at some of the things that you've seen and heard in companies. Can you hold out some light? Do you see some light, some rays of positivity and good hope in that now eyes are a little wider open? And if there's some thought that goes into action, that we might actually be heading to a better place where it is not something that fills you with disgust.
Definitely. I mean, it's one of the reasons we actually put out a newsletter called Simply Good, because we want to talk about the good. We want to see the good that is happening. I'm so sick of talking about all the bad things that people are doing, and let's focus on the good, because then there might be more good, right? There might be more things that are happening. And so I think that it's really important to look at, and it's not, I hate to use the word like whitewashing, right? It's not ignoring the bad, but it is also realizing that if we focus on the good, that's how you start to get more of it, right? You start to put out intentions. And when you can see, some people say, well, you're creating like you're preaching to the choir and you're creating an echo chamber. And that's not what we're trying to do. What we are trying to do, though, is work with those people who already have decided that, yes, we want to make change. We want to have an impact. We want things to be better, because they can help move the people who are kind of on the fence into the positivity, right? The people who don't want to do it, have decided that this isn't something that's for them, that's fine, because it's not my job to change your beliefs about things. My job is to change your behavior. And if you have hard-pressed beliefs that are completely, counterintuitive to mine, that's totally up to you, right? I don't spend my day banging my head against a brick wall, because I just walk away with a bloody forehead. And that's not my intention at all.
No. Well, I love what you've just said there, because the female lead is always about celebrating the good, the inspiring, the encouraging. And that is the way we think people can see the right way and model in a better way. So it's lovely to hear you say that. So thank you for sharing those thoughts. I want to throw it open to our audience, who I know will have lots of questions for you. So let's start. What's the best way to introduce a diversity and inclusion team to a company? How best to kick it off?
Yeah, I think it's starting with, before introducing a team, it's actually coming up with the reason you need a team in the first place, right? Because when you just throw a team in, it's like, if a company doesn't know this is happening, it's like blindsiding them, right? Like, you want to create a culture of inclusion. And so then you want people to work together to create that. So before even, introducing a team, you first have to figure out, well, what do you need the team for? Right? What do you want them to do? Who's going to be on this team? And allow for input from people, again, who actually want to see change. I'm sure there are plenty of people in your company who have been asking, begging, demanding for change. This is the opportunity to get their feedback, to actually hear them. Because what I find just so astounding is so many companies don't listen to their employees. They want to come to me and ask me, well, what do you think we should do? And my first question is always, have you asked your employees? Mm-hmm. They work there, right? They have so many thoughts about how to make your workplace better. Ask them, right? Start there.
Yeah, well, it is the old-fashioned top-down approach, isn't it? Which is, I, as the leader, must know the answer. Therefore, I need a team to find out, as opposed to, as you say, bottom up, where you actually ask for the solutions.
Well, and what you just said, is the idea that, I'm the leader, so I must know the answers. That is so not the case, right?
Yeah.
The leader's job is to lead people to finding the answers. It's not for you to be the all-knowing, right? The wise and all-knowing, because most people are not, right? That's, I think, a really important definition for leaders to really be thinking about. Is like, we're not looking to you to have all the answers, but we are looking for you to help us get them and to guide us to them.
That's beautifully said. Absolutely beautifully said. Thank you. In the moment when you're subjected to bias, either by someone dismissing your view or raising doubts to your credibility, what is a good way to respond to comments?
Yes. This is a hard one, right? Because you want to, it comes in so many forms, right? You get microaggressions and you get people belittling you or devaluing you or ignoring you or twisting your words, right? It comes in so many forms. And sometimes in the moment you are angry, rightfully so. And you really just don't even know how to handle it. And I always tell people that it is okay to walk away from it, right? And come back to it later, because people will say, well, if I come back to it later, it makes me seem petty. No, if you come back to it later, you can say, we had a meeting last week where you said X, Y, Z, and it really made me feel, frustrated, or it made me feel devalued. And I was hoping that we could revisit that conversation. Maybe I misunderstood. Could you explain a little bit more about what you were trying to get to when you said X, right? Because I took it this way, but maybe I was wrong, right? Maybe I misunderstood. And you give them the opportunity to explain themselves. And it also gives you time to really think through, because sometimes it is a little thing, right? Sometimes it is a small microaggression and maybe it's not a big deal. But if it's still bothering you the next day, then it's a big deal, right? If you're still thinking about it, you have the right to go back and to revisit that conversation. Sometimes it's not best to do it in that moment. But I think the other thing is, that's what we talk about, being an ally and being able to interrupt. And when you see this happening for someone else, you see that somebody else is being dismissed, to be able to step in and say, hey, let's not do that. Let's hear this person out. Let's hear what they have to say, or whatever it is, or especially if the person's not in the room, right? Knowing that you have someone who can advocate for you when you're not in the room. Like, what are people saying about you? If somebody steps in and says, oh, Linda doesn't have the expertise to do X, somebody else who knows that needs to say, wait a minute, that's not accurate. What makes you say that?
Yeah. And that's where helping each other becomes so important, and standing, for those quality attributes and being an advocate for those quality attributes. Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Alice asks, what do you think of blind recruitment?
I laugh because I give you my really honest, transparent answer. I hate it.
We need more.
And I'm trying to because it has its merits, right? There's places that it can be useful. But at the end of the day, as a Black woman, I don't want blind recruiting, because if you don't want to hire me as you see me today, I don't want to work there. I'm not interested. But I do understand that because of the unconscious bias, sometimes you need something to help get people into the pool in the first place, right? And then once they're in the pool, then the person goes, oh, I didn't realize that this Black person, this Latina person, this, gay person could do this job. And so it changes their perspective. So there is, I think, blind recruiting is helpful for when you're doing, testing and things like that, where you can take off names and geographies and all those kinds of things and have people just do some sort of blind project. But obviously, I don't think it's not going to work for just interviewing, right? At some point, there has to be some face-to-face interaction, obviously. And so I do think, it has its merits, but it's got to be used judiciously. And I don't know that people are necessarily using it in the right way.
Okay, well navigated. Very good. Laura asks, What terms in safe vocabulary, I can't even say it, have you recommended to companies to start disrupting or catching unconscious bias at work without alienating people?
So this comes into, the uncomfortable conversations, right? We spend a lot of time doing learning labs for companies around conversations that need to happen and creating psychological safety. So there's a great TED Talk by Amy Edmondson on psychological safety. I suggest if you Google that, you can watch it. There's a Google study actually that was done that talks about what makes teams successful. Some of that has to do with psychological safety. And so you can't do this without creating psychological safety in the workplace. And you might sometimes alienate people. And that's okay, because at some point you have to draw the line in the sand and decide what your values are. And those people who don't align with those values, you want to alienate them. You want them to leave. You want them to make space and make room for people who do align with your values. So, not so you can confront without being confrontational, right? And you can do this without alienating, but you need to, you want to create a culture where people know, like, oh, this is how we work here. I'm good with this. And if I don't like that, then I'm going to leave.
Yeah, it's drawing the lines, I suppose, between this is who we want to be and this is who we don't want to be.
Right.
Yeah. Very good. Next question. Oh, why did you write, this may have to be our last question, by the way, but why did you write your book now and why do we need it?
So it really goes back to what I think I said earlier, right? About just the world being so in such a place where people were asking for direction. They really needed direction. And even now, like, I feel like last year the theme was in 2020 that everyone wanted to get into action. They really were like, we just need to do something. And I feel like for 2021 so far, I'm seeing that people have moved to the awareness phase. So the book is actually broken down into those 4 areas, as I said, awareness, alignment, action, and advocacy. And I'm seeing now in the conversations that I'm having with corporate clients that they're realizing awareness is where they need to start. And so I wrote the book to help to define those different areas and to help companies really see where they might be landing and to really start to get a sense, to start to create that strategy for their workplace. And so that they can create that culture, they can get their values in alignment, and they can do the work. Because, quite a few companies have been like, oh, we need you to do this. And I'm like, well, then I become an employee, right? Like, I need to show you how to do it so you can go off and then continue it. We want it to be sustainable. And that's the ultimate goal, is sustainable.
Well, I think that's a wonderful position and encouragement to people. And I really love what you said about leaders not having to know what the answer is, because I think this is something that does have to be understood and learned. And then, as you say, create those slightly uncomfortable moments to make sure it's the organization you want to be part of. Right. So brilliantly said. Thank you so much for your wonderful advice and, sharing that. And I hope, everyone will rush out and buy your book when it arrives on the 30th of March, and we'll put that up on our website so that people can see it.
Thank you. Yes, it's definitely available for pre-order right now. We've been telling everyone pre-order.
Pre-order, absolutely. So before I say goodbye to you, can I just please mention to everybody that next week, same time, same channel, we have Amy Morin, who's going to be speaking to us, and she's going to talk to us about how to build mental strength. So I hope to see you all there. Until then, Stacey, thank you so much for being with us. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.